Hey everybody, and welcome to another update from my HO scale Union Pacific Heartland Division layout. This week we move a little further west from the Calumet River scene and begin work in the area of the east entrance and exit of the Chicago classification yard. Here is the future site of the Union Pacific Maintenance Away headquarters buildings, as well as an industrial sand manufacturing plant. So keep watching to find out how I install fascia board between the two levels of track, create a 7-foot long retaining wall, and use dirt that I collected from my backyard as ground cover. On the lower level here is the east entrance and exit to the Chicago classification yard. And on the upper deck, or the upper section, is the entrance and exit to the St. Louis loop. For this video, I'm just going to work on finishing off this separation between the first and second levels here to give it a better look and get the scene moving along, so I can hopefully begin work on this UP Maintenance Away area here and the engine facility that's adjacent to it. Also in the same area, up in the top back here, I'm going to probably do some kind of background buildings to look like downtown St. Louis, old brick buildings, stuff like that. And then on this spur off of here is going to be a sand or an asphalt plant, something like that, to give some switching opportunities in this area off the yard lead there. Before I start work, I'm going to remove all the rolling stock, the vehicles, and the structures that are in this area, as I will be putting up a pretty long piece of hardboard fascia in the back, and I don't want to knock anything on the floor or bump into anything and cause more damage. That'll just add to the project list of stuff to repair. I noticed when I originally laid the track, I was probably in a hurry just to get the loop completed, so I didn't put enough feeders, or as many feeders as I probably should have, in at the time. So now I'm just going to add a couple drops of feeders, get those wired into the bus, and then I'll be able to secure the track down and keep moving along. I like to do my feeders where I solder underneath the rail joiners or the rail, just so that they're not sticking out the side or show through any of the ballast once it's put down. To hold the track down, I'm just using this Elmer's clear glue, as I found it to be pretty forgiving whenever you need to pull the track up to make changes. And it holds very well and doesn't show through. For all of my feeder connections to the bus, I use the suitcase connectors, and they seem to work out really well. And they make the job quick and easy. All right, I've got the glue underneath the track and filled in most of the ties that were missing. So I'm gonna let that dry and work on this fascia board. So I went upstairs and cut off a piece of 1/8 inch hardboard, and just gonna fit this thing in here real quick. And then draw some lines on where I'm going to hit it with a jigsaw. Before I throw the final coat of paint on these fascia boards, I'm just going to brush on some primer. And of course, rolling on this primer first is going to help the paint stick to it much better and give a lot better coverage with hopefully just one coat. While I'm waiting on some paint to dry, I went ahead and started on this urban retaining wall kit from Walthers. And I'm just gonna put that alongside the tracks on the lower level. Now the sections on the kit, the styrene, plastic, whatever, is all kind of bowed. So when they're standing up, it's pretty wavy. So what I did was took some scrap styrene on the back, glued it to the back here, and then I cut this 1/8 inch piece of hardboard. And I'm gonna glue it to the back of the retaining wall and hopefully make it a little less wavy. And that'll also make it a little more sturdy. So when we go to do some scenery and stuff, it's less likely to get knocked over. One more thing to do before the fascia gets installed is to put in some mounting points. I like to use the pneumatic brad gun to secure the fascia to the layout and giving some vertical support that I'll be able to shoot the nails into. And I'm just going to wood glue those, let it dry, and that'll be enough to hold it. Then I'll mark on top of the layout where the nailing point is and go from there. Now it's actually time to put the fascia on. So the way I've been mounting the fascia to the layout is just using the brad gun. And it's worked out pretty well so far. It does leave some nail holes, but I can go back later and fill those in with some putty and then repaint it, and they pretty much disappear. With that portion of the fascia installed, I put up the retaining wall and the board behind it glued to the back, really straightened it out. So I'm liking that look, and probably going to extend it, since I've got some more pieces, all the way around about halfway through the turn and then end it there. My plan behind this portion of the retaining wall is to slope up some groundwork, probably about 1/2 inch or so, just at a gradual slope, and then blend it into the back piece of the fascia board there. And I think that'll help divide the two scenes and still give it a good look of some realism. Now I'm just going to finish putting these retaining wall pieces together, just cleaning up the flashing, which is pretty minimal on this kit, thankfully, and getting them prepped and ready for gluing together. As far as painting it, probably just going to hit it with some spray paint, to be honest, since it's such a large piece. At least to get a good base color on it, we'll use some spray paint, and then probably hit it with the airbrush just to give it some weathering. So I just realized these 3-section pieces are built a little bit different. So we're going to go without these 3-section pieces and just continue to join the 4-section pieces together. Here's a look at the retaining wall after I hit it with a couple colors of spray paint out in the 20-degree weather in the dark. Good times for sure. Brought it inside, looks pretty good. It's about 7 foot long, so pretty impressive retaining wall. And probably just gonna have to touch it up with some pastels and maybe the airbrush once we put it on the layout. I've got some remnants of some Woodland Scenics shaper sheet, and really nice stuff. I got it on sale at Hobby Lobby when they were having a closeout sale of all the Woodland Scenic stuff, so it didn't pay much at all for it. And I'm gonna give it a shot here on the back of the retaining wall. My plan right now is to rough in the shaper sheet behind the retaining wall and up against the fascia, and then remove it and put the plaster over it, let it cure, paint it, and then install it behind the wall. That way I don't mess up the paint on the fascia board. All right, I'm about to mix up some plaster and then put it over the shaper sheet and let that harden up so then I can apply some paint. And then hopefully just place this shaper sheet landscape in behind the retaining wall and up against the fascia, and then I can put some ground cover over it and call it a day. I'm kind of skeptical if it's going to work or not, but there's only one way to find out. I want this plaster to be a little bit runny so that it soaks into this shaper sheet, because the shaper sheet is kind of furry, if you will, and just need all those pieces of lint to just lay down and then harden. So hopefully I can brush this in there and it all works out. All right, here you can see the scene is coming together. I've got the scenery sheet painted and installed. On the first large section I used plaster over the top. It worked out pretty well, and I was able to negotiate it to fit behind the wall and in front of the fascia. The second and third smaller pieces I just covered with Mod Podge, and it left it pretty flexible, not very hard at all. Then I've coated it with some Scenics earth ground cover, like coloring stuff, and then just put it on, resting behind the wall and up against the background. Where the joints come together here, I plan on putting in like a bluff type rock. That was a good time to mix up some brown colors and go ahead and paint the track so that it's ready for ballast when the time comes. In order to fill in the gaps between the plaster rock mold and the shaper sheet, I mixed up a batch of Sculpta mold, which is real easy to use, and just press it in, and then we'll just hit that with the earth coloring and move on. So for the first time, I'm using dirt that I collected from the backyard for ground cover, and I went out there yesterday, collected it. It was a little wet, so I let it air out overnight on this old baking pan in front of a fan. Seems to work pretty good. So now we're going to put some in the blender and chop it up, make it a little finer, and then go to sift it and see what we end up with. I picked this blender up yesterday from Walmart. It was only like $16, so not too much of an investment. Couldn't find any old ones in the neighborhood, and I was kind of running out of time to wait for yard sale season, so decided to pick this one up, and hopefully it lasts a good while. Just gonna chop up this maybe about a cup worth of soil in there and see what happens. All right, you can see I put the first batch through the strainer and it separated out the chunks from the real small particles, and I think this is going to look pretty good on the layout. And I'm just applying the dirt the same way I do all my other scenery products, and that's with this old retired Dairy Queen spoon. And here's a good look of the dirt after the glue has had time to dry. It's kept its color and looks pretty good. Next step on that will be adding some vegetation, some static grass, stuff like that to help blend it in and look even more realistic. I also had time to ballast the track, just the yard lead in front, and then the main track in the back, just for about 4 foot or so I got done. Ballasting track is definitely not the funnest thing to do in my eyes, so we'll save that for another rainy day. What I have been working on as well is putting together this Glacier Industrial Sands kit from Walthers. Pretty good kit. I like the look of it. What's funny is that it comes with everything you need to make the asphalt plant in the same box. So I had actually bought both the kits thinking I was going to combine them, but now I can just use pieces from the asphalt plant in with the sand plant to make it a little more realistic, I guess. Add some more details and features to it. One thing I did do on the elevator portion was use some Tichy Train Group safety cage ladders and replace the factory Walthers ladders with those. Definitely a huge improvement for the kit, and not a lot of work to add some pretty decent details. Another upgrade to the kit I have planned is to add a flashing LED on the top of the elevator here. Just run the wires down, be real easy inside the elevator, drill a hole at the base there through the layout, and install this East Coast Circuits 0603 wired LED. Is super tiny. Put it on a flashing circuit and should work out quite well. So one last thing before I head out this week is I wanted to share with you a couple of the tools that I use while building kits on the layout. I always find it interesting what other modelers are using and look for them for ideas of what I can do differently, and maybe this will help some of you out as well. Or if you have anything that you'd like to share, just post it in the comments so we can all learn from it. But number one here is just some sprue cutters to get the pieces off the kit sprues. Makes a quick, clean cut and saves the X-Acto knife blades. This here is a scalpel, very sharp and very inexpensive to replace the blades. You find those on Amazon. I'll post a link for sure. But definitely I switched to that about a year ago and haven't looked back. I do still keep an X-Acto type knife around. This one is from Kirby Tools, and I'll post a link for them as well. But definitely very heavy handle on this one for good control while cutting pieces. And the blade just pops in and out, held in there with a magnet. So even though it's with just a magnet, it holds pretty tight and gets the job done. For my plastic weld, if you've ever knocked one of these bottles over, it's a pain. So I came up with this here, just a block that I use a 1.5 inch spade bit, drill that out a little bit, and then the bottle sits in there pretty snug, and you really have to try to knock that thing over. Last but not least is the type of paint I use. About 95% of the time is this Model Air from Vallejo. All I do is just throw it in the airbrush, don't need to thin it. Sprays on well, cleans up easy, and I'm by no means a professional airbrush user, so the easier I can make it on myself, the more enjoyable of an experience it is. And I definitely like to use the airbrush for almost everything, and using these paints definitely is a game changer for a beginner like myself. I went ahead and wired up the siding underneath the silos. So we'll go ahead and do some simple switching operations. UP1213 is an Athearn Genesis GP39-2 primed for grime edition with the faded paint. He's pulling in 2 empty hoppers and a boxcar, and we're going to replace those 2 hoppers that are underneath the silo. We're going to load those up and swap them out with the empties. Now the locomotive pulls forward past the trailing point switch. This is a manually operated turnout. It's a Payco Code 83, number 5. Once it has been set, the locomotive slowly pushes the 2 empty hoppers onto the siding until he couples up with the 2 hoppers that need to be loaded and pulled out. The first car has been preloaded, so the locomotive will pull forward and position the second hopper underneath the silos for loading. Once the second hopper has been fully loaded, the crew moves the train to position the first hopper over the imaginary scale for weighing. Once the weight has been recorded, the process is repeated for the second loaded hopper. With the train back on the siding, the crew will join the two loaded hoppers with the boxcar and leave them in place while they take the two empty hoppers and slowly push them down the siding into position underneath the sand silos. The conductor then uncouples the empties and the power heads back onto the siding to rejoin the train. This train will continue westward into Chicago Yard, where those cars will be sorted and manifested on trains that will go elsewhere across the Heartland Division. I'm ending this video with a TRRA unit coal train passing through Chicago on its way to Indiana Harbor. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out my previous videos for tons of how-to information and tips for layout construction. Also check the links in the description below for several other products I frequently use and recommend. This is Model Trains 365, out.